Morning, everybody. It's Antoinette with 2OGs Hooking and Stitching Island Style, coming to you from Bear Island, New Brunswick, Canada. Tuesday morning, April 7th. Two days in a row. Ooh, I'm on a roll here. I'm on my way to work. I said it's the only chance I really have to chat right now. So I thought I'd just give you a call. But I've been tossing around some ideas about some videos and future videos to do. One of the things I was going to try to do, and it's along the lines of get to know your makers better. And maybe it's something that other people might want to be interested in. I was going to put together a picture slideshow of things like when I was driving truck, 30 years. I have pictures of places I've been and stuff like that, but what I also had I have pictures of, like, my truck was called the Estrogen Express because my two puppies were girls and I was a girl, so my truck was the Estrogen Express, which everybody thought was quite funny. And then we had 3 other trucks in our corporate fleet. My husband had a Peterbilt, and then we had another Kenworth and another Freightliner. And they put pictures up and just explain a little bit about what I've done. And I have pictures of when I was working for the union, some of the off-road equipment I ran, the big 777s, which is 150-ton dump or 50-ton dump, I have to look, and articulates, and just things I've done. I just thought maybe I'd see if I could put together some questions to answer of things that would help us to get to know each other better. So that's something I was thinking about. And I thought about, throw it around in my head, I need to make some more stitch markers. Maybe how I make stitch markers, which my stitch markers are not as fancy as a lot of the beautiful stitch markers I see other makers make. That's redundant. But that's something I thought about. Maybe each of us could show how our techniques are for crocheting or knitting, or if you have a cute little tricks and tips and stuff like that, shortcuts, or you might know a way, better to do something. It's probably been done, but then again, it might not be done. So that's just some things I've been tossing around my brain when I'm in the car, or I'm in the shower or whatever. My brain just starts to work, and I just start thinking about things to do. I thought that might be something interesting, just to get variety of content. I love my knitting and my crocheting, but also the process, because that's why I love knitting and crocheting, is the process. Starting with just some yarn, some hooks or needles, and going from there. And I'm in process, again, the process of designing, and I am working on my design. I even had somebody volunteer today. When I'm done, they would love to be a tester for me. I thought this, that'll be a challenge. I think my hard part is going to be writing the pattern, because I think I'm going to have a tendency to be too wordy writing the pattern, but we'll see. But listen, I'm at my first client's house, so I will be back on in a couple of hours. I'm here taking a picture of that little tiny cabin on that little itty bitty island out there. I took a close-up of it as best I could. So I'll try to and put that picture in. I'll add that picture to the video, but that's getting away from it all. There's just social distancing for you. This is Kleins Point Road that we're coming up. I just ran to the post office for a client, and down here to the left, I'll have to get it on a date in somebody's home. There is the Jerome Andrews Gallery, one of our art galleries. So that's another place I'll be able to. And there's my seatbelt, ding, 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 ding. But to be continued in the next segment. This is Kleins Point Road that we're coming up. I just ran to the post office for a client, and down here to the left, I'll have to get it on a date in somebody's home. There is the Jerome Andrews Gallery, one of our art galleries. So that's another place I'll be able to. And there's my seatbelt, ding, 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 ding. But to be continued in the next segment. Hello. As you'll see, I'm not in the car anymore. I'm in my craft room. I have been busy taping on the camcorder, the Spinrite Hirschner's orders, and I'm also going to add the Holzgarn yarn review. So I thought that was enough for that video. So to end the chat today, I'm going to read The Storm of the Century. I thought that would finish out the video. So here we go. From Tales from a Small Island by Sterling Lambert. The true spirit of Christmas reigned on Penfield Ridge Christmas Eve, 1970, as residents opened their doors to hundreds of cold, weary motorists who were stranded there by one of the most vicious winter storms in the area in recent history. Scores of stories could be told by those caught by the storm, and the following, perhaps typical, is one of them. The weatherman forecast heavy snow, but on the morning of December 24th, only light flurries filled the air. The roads were good, so we, my father and I, decided little risk was involved in starting for St. John, a journey of about 50 miles each way, to pick up relatives who wished to spend Christmas here. As we made the ferry crossing to Latique from Deer Island, I felt sorry for the lobster truck driver who made the crossing with us. He had driven all night to get here with a load of lobsters and was now, about mid-morning, heading back to his home near Halifax, Nova Scotia, hoping to beat the storm so he could spend Christmas with his family. Considering the weatherman's warning, traffic was heavy on the road to St. John, but the driving was good, and the light snow flurries even seemed to be subsiding a bit. The trip was uneventful, and when we arrived at St. John, we were amazed to see many last-minute shoppers crowding the shopping center at West St. John. At about 1:45, we started for home. The roads were still good, and still only light snow flurries filled the air, although the wind seemed to have increased somewhat. A few miles out of the city, without warning, visibility was reduced to a few feet as the wind-blown snow drifted uninhibited across the open expanse of Spruce Lake. Within minutes, the wind increased in strength and the snowfall became heavier. The roads remained relatively good, but visibility alternated between fair to near zero, and driving speed had to be reduced from a maximum of about 40 miles per hour to a mere crawl when the twirling snow closed all sight of the road. It was impossible to see approaching automobiles until they were a few feet away. Though almost everyone was driving with their headlights on, to make matters worse, ice pellets were forming on the windshield, getting under the wiper blades and preventing them from doing their job. We turned the heater defroster full on to no avail and noted other drivers stopped along the way, beating ice and snow from their wiper blades. Occasionally we would come upon a procession of 3 or 4 cars driving almost bumper to bumper. The head car would be leading the way with the rest following his taillights, which made it a bit easier for those who were following the leader, but I am sure if the leader had gone into the ditch or over an embankment, we would all have followed him blindly, like a flock of sheep led to the slaughter. These were the conditions as we finally approached the straight and narrow road that bisects the open windswept fields of Penfield Ridge. Maximum speed here was reduced to 10 miles per hour, but being the 4th car in the bumper-to-bumper procession at this point put all the skills of navigating on the leader. It was about 2:15 p.m., and with less than 20 miles of driving to the ferry at Latique, there was plenty of time to catch the last trip, which left 5 p.m. The ghostly procession crept along the ridge, occasionally stopping when the driving, blustering clouds of snow would shut out even the taillights of the car a few feet ahead. The visible world of the driver stopped at the front of his car hood, and at times his windshield a foot or 2 before his eyes. The snow was now starting to build up in drifts across the road, and already poor visibility worsened as we passed the halfway mark down the ridge. Soon the car ahead of us stopped again, and we waited 5-10 minutes, unable to see beyond it and unwilling to get out of the car to find out what was holding it up. When it finally became apparent something was wrong up ahead, we finally stepped out into the worst blizzard we had ever witnessed. The gale-forced winds shrieked through the invisible hydro and telephone wires overhead, and unhampered by trees or other obstruction for miles, and the now heavy snowfall came barreling down the entire length of Penfield Ridge. It was difficult to stand up, impossible to face it, and even back to it, the swirling snow would fill our eyes and take our breath. We stumbled up the road past the first car and the second, and then we saw it. Like a ghostly apparition, a great silvery transport truck straight across the roadway, jammed between the snowbanks on either side. Beneath it was the mangled, twisted wreckage of 2 automobiles, and to one side was another car with its entire side removed, cleanly cut off as if by a giant can opener. Clothing, groceries, and Christmas presents were strewn for 100 feet around, and the sickly smell of raw gasoline filled the tortured air. We then learned of the tragedy that had occurred here minutes before. 4 people injured, 3 critically, and 1, a little 9-year-old boy, was to die a few days later. One of the injured was still trapped within the mass of the shredded metal beneath the transport. The accident had occurred in front of the home of Mr. and Mrs. Ernest Hawkins, and the injured were taken there until the ambulance came. After they were taken to the hospital, a wrecker attempted to clear the roadway, but it was not until darkness had fallen that, along with another large truck and snowplow, fastened bumper to bumper, were successful. The road had been closed for nearly 4 hours, and was now impassable because of the high winds and heavy snowfall. Hundreds of us were stranded on Penfield Ridge, and it was Christmas Eve. Someone came and told us Mr. and Mrs. Hawkins wanted everyone to come in and out of the storm. By now it was like something one would see in a film on the Arctic. It was a challenge to wade the few hundred feet to the house. Inside, the house was full of people, but they continued to struggle in for some time. Mrs. Hawkins' daughter, who along with her husband and son were visiting for the holidays, said her mother always wished for lots of company on Christmas Eve. This year, her wish came true. 40 guests had arrived unexpectedly. At first, the group was rather quiet, or as quiet as it was possible for 40 people to be. Sadness and worry showed in the faces of many. No word had been received from the hospital on the condition of the injured, and many would be separated from their loved ones on this very special night. The aroma of a baking turkey and the strains of Christmas carols coming over the TV did little for the morale of those away from home. One woman who had her husband and daughter with her had 5 small children at home. Another young woman's husband was one of those injured and taken to the hospital. There were several young people in their 20s who had been on their way home for Christmas, and a number of toddlers who didn't seem to mind at all, except next morning when Santa hadn't left anything under the tree for them. There was a truck driver, a man who worked in a bank. People of all ages from every walk of life became one big family with a common plight. The telephone was always busy, those present calling home to let their families know they were safe, and endless calls coming in from people searching for loved ones caught in the storm. Someone would answer the phone and then shout, Is John Doe or Mary Smith here? Occasionally they would be present, but for many callers the search was to continue. The bathroom, too, was as busy as the telephone. Aside from a couple of bags of donuts, no food was brought in, but Mrs. Hawkins and her daughter saw to it that no one went hungry. Mrs. Hawkins said it reminded her of the story of the 5 loaves and 2 fishes. As the evening wore on, everyone became resigned to the fact that they would be away from home for the night, and there was nothing they could do about it but make the best of it. The young woman whose husband was in the hospital finally received word he would be all right, and the atmosphere in the household changed from one of sadness to a happier mood. Someone got out a checkboard, and another group started a friendly card game. Many present found they had mutual friends or interests, and a few old friends met again for the first time in years. When the late news came over the TV, it was a strange feeling to hear about the events that had and were still taking place here along the ridge. We learned that other houses, stores, restaurants, and hotels in the area were filled with people. There were hundreds on Penfield Ridge alone. It was near midnight when the RCMP called the house and requested the drivers of the cars there to go out to them. The snowplows were coming to clear the road, and they would tow us out of the snowbanks. There were only 5 or 6 cars, besides those that were damaged, at the scene of the accident. The rest had been stopped by the police at either end of the ridge shortly after the accident had occurred. We bundled up in what clothes we had and headed for the cars in groups or pairs for safety as the storm had worsened. We had to almost feel our way through the line of snowbound cars. The car with its side ripped off was still by the side of the road with its dome light on, glowing eerily through the clouds of snow. At one point I thought I was walking on bare pavement and discovered it was the roof of a buried car. A minute later, unable to see, I dropped 3 or 4 feet straight down over the edge of a snowdrift. With me was Michael Guerrero, who, along with his wife and infant son, had been a passenger in my car. Abandoned cars and trucks lined both sides of the road, and we walked around, over and between them. Ours was the last one in the lineup and was not buried, like some of the others. When we finally reached it, we got in and started the motor to keep warm. Occasionally the glow of what appeared to be a flashing light up ahead could be seen, but that was all. After a few minutes, a dim light appeared from behind and stopped alongside. It was a snowmobile. Someone beat on the car window, and when I lowered it, there was a bundled up figure, its face covered, standing there. It shouted, "Are you all right?" And I was surprised to discover it was a woman. She was with someone else on the snowmobile. When I assured her we were okay, she jumped on her sled and took off into the storm, shouting, "Merry Christmas." I wish I could have seen whether or not the man with her was wearing a red suit and had white whiskers. After almost an hour's wait in the car, we saw a dim light waving back and forth up ahead and took it to be a signal. We left the car and followed it. Someone had come to tell us the plows had been called off because of the intensity of the storm. We had also learned we had been reported missing, and the RCMP called after we got to the house to find out if we had returned. We had all had a hard day and evening, and we were weary. It was time for bed. One family and the small children occupied a spare room. The truck driver and the man from Bonnie River curled up beside the roaring cook stove in the living room. People were in chairs and sofa, and the floor was completely occupied, with the weary travelers fitted around the pieces like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. A 4-month-old baby spent his first Christmas Eve in a dresser drawer, and my father and I spent the night on the floor under the kitchen table. Here we slept fitfully until about 4:30 a.m., when the baby started crying and we were all up again. Despite a rumor that the snowplow drivers had gone on strike and visions of spending the rest of the winter here, the plows showed up before daylight, and the drivers of the stranded cars went out again. By the time daylight came, the wind had abated, and we had been towed out. Though most of the cars refused to start, their engine compartments were packed with snow, and many of us had to leave them wherever we could find a spot off the highway that had been plowed out. The travelers further up the ridge had been luckier, as their cars were sheltered and started. As soon as the road had been cleared of snow and automobiles, the procession of people and cars crept down the ridge, everyone heading for home at last. It reminded me of newsreels I had seen of refugees returning home after the war. Someone from Deer Island shouted to me from a car as I walked back from where I had the car towed. All the taxis were snowed in, and another car going to the island was a short distance behind. They offered us a ride home, and I ran into the house wherever I had spent the night to gather up my passengers. Everyone was saying goodbye and thanking their hosts. We joined the procession past St. George and down the Back Bay Road behind a snowplow, and when we got to Letete, the ferry Abnaki was waiting, and what a welcome sight it was. We would all be home within an hour. The ordeal was over, and all of us were grateful to Mr. and Mrs. Hawkins and the other kind folk who opened up their homes to us. And as someone remarked as we watched the RCMP, the drivers of the wreckers, plows, etc., working in the storm. Their jobs may appear easy at times, but this is when they really earn their money. It was an unusual experience for most of us, and at Christmas Eve, none of us will ever forget. So I hope you liked that story. And it was a little bit of a long one, but it just shows you how things are around where we're at. We take care of our own. We help our neighbors out. And that's one of the things I love about living here. So until next time, this is Antoinette saying goodbye from Deer Island, New Brunswick. Have a great night.